San Lazaro was not the kind of place that appeared on most maps, tucked deep into the folds of the South American mountains. It was little more than a scattering of homes. A modest church, a schoolhouse with peeling paint, and fields carved into terraces along the slopes. For centuries, its people had lived quietly, farming maize and beans, tending goats, and drawing water from springs that wound down through the valley. Around 300 souls called it home. To outsiders, it was a footnote. To those who lived there, it was the entire world. Life in San Lazaro followed a rhythm untouched by time. At dawn, roosters crowed and children tumbled into the dusty streets, chasing one another with wooden toys while their mothers swept porches or stirred pots over open flames. By mid-morning, elders gathered in the square, leaning on walking sticks, trading stories and laughter beneath the shadow of the bell tower. At dusk, smoke curled from chimneys, and the smell of roasting maize filled the air. It was simple, but it was life. A life they believed would stretch on unchanged for generations. Traders from neighboring valleys visited once every few weeks, hauling supplies on mules and wagons. On their last visit, nothing seemed unusual. San Lazaro bustled with its familiar warmth. Families brought baskets of produce to the square to barter for tools and cloth. Children trailed behind the traders, eager for bits of candy or stories from the outside world. The villagers spoke cheerfully about their next journey to market. "We will come next week," they promised, as they always had, and then the traders left, expecting to see them again soon. When they returned, the village had vanished. The scene that greeted them was one of confusion first, and then dread. San Lazaro stood exactly as they had left it. The houses were intact, roofs solid, doors swinging loosely on hinges. Fields were still green with crops. Goats wandered freely, bleeding in hunger, untethered. Laundry hung stiff on clotheslines, snapping in the wind. Meals sat abandoned on tables, bowls half-eaten, bread left to harden, cups tipped but not shattered. What was missing were the people. Not a single voice called from the square. No children darted between houses. No elders gathered at their usual benches. San Lazaro was silent, but it was not deserted in the way of a place long abandoned. It felt as if life had been interrupted mid-breath. The traders searched, calling out names, knocking on doors. They walked the streets in disbelief, their voices echoing without answer. In the schoolhouse, they found slates covered with chalk, lessons half finished. In the church, candles burned low, wax still warm. In one home, a pot of stew simmered on the fire, reduced to thick paste, as if no one had stirred it in hours. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints leading away, no blood, no hurried packing. Every possession remained where it had always been, as though 300 villagers had simply stood up from their meals and walked out into the air, leaving everything behind. The traders rushed to authorities in the nearest town. News spread quickly, disbelief rippling through surrounding valleys. A caravan of soldiers, police, and villagers descended upon San Lazaro. At first, they expected to find the missing nearby, perhaps in the mountains, perhaps fleeing some disaster. But days of searching turned up nothing. Helicopters circled overhead, scanning ridges and valleys. Dogs were brought in to track scents, but they wandered aimlessly, whining as if confused. Soldiers marched into the hills, following goat paths and riverbeds, shouting into the silence. But every trail ended the same way: emptiness. Authorities searched the homes again, carefully this time. They noted details that chilled them further. In one house, a letter sat unfinished, the pen still resting beside it. In another, a chair was knocked over, but nothing was taken. In nearly every kitchen, food was left mid-preparation, knives on cutting boards, vegetables half-chopped. It was as if the people had been taken in the middle of their daily tasks, without warning, without reason. Neighbors from other valleys grew uneasy. Some refused to go near San Lazaro at all. Others ventured only in daylight, whispering prayers as they crossed its streets. Rumors took hold quickly. Perhaps an epidemic had swept through. They said, and the villagers had fled, but if so, where were they now? Others whispered of foul play, a cult, a mass abduction, or something darker. The soldiers dismissed such talk. To them, it was a puzzle, but one that could be solved. Yet even they grew unsettled. Reports from the first search patrols noted strange silences, compasses that spun erratically, and radios that crackled with static. Nothing in San Lazaro made sense. Not the absence of footprints, not the intact belongings, not the suddenness with which life had stopped. The mystery reached beyond the mountains. Journalists arrived, cameras rolling, eager to document the ghost village. Their footage captured haunting images, empty streets, children's toys scattered in dust, goats standing in doorways bleeding for owners who would never return. Viewers who watched the broadcast shivered at the sight of bowls of food left on tables, spoons still resting inside, meals uneaten for days. The official search stretched for weeks. Entire valleys were scoured, rivers were dragged, caves were inspected, but not a single trace of the 300 missing souls of San Lazaro was ever found. Eventually, the authorities pulled back, leaving behind only reports filled with theories and contradictions. The traders who had first stumbled upon the empty village could not shake the image of what they had seen. Neither could the families from surrounding towns, who had shared markets, marriages, and festivals with the people of San Lazaro. To them, it felt as if the earth itself had opened its mouth and swallowed an entire community. And as the weeks turned into months, San Lazaro became more than a mystery. It became a legend, because when 300 lives disappear without a trace, leaving only silence behind, explanations are never enough. It was as though 300 souls had stepped out of their lives and into thin air. The investigation into San Lazaro began with urgency and confusion. When word spread that the entire village had been found empty, the authorities acted quickly. Police caravans rolled into the valley, their sirens echoing off the cliffs. Helicopters swept overhead, their blades chopping through the thin mountain air as cameras scanned the ridges. Dogs were brought in, trained to follow human scent across valleys and ravines. Even military patrols were dispatched, their boots pounding the earth as they searched house to house, field to field. And yet, no matter how thorough the effort, the result was always the same: silence. The dogs whined at thresholds, circling in frustration, unable to find a trail. Helicopters returned with hours of footage, only to report stillness, no movement, no gathering, no bodies scattered across the mountainside. Soldiers swept the perimeter, rifles in hand, their shouts of San Lazaro echoing through the valley. Not a single answer returned. It was as though the entire community had stepped out of their homes and dissolved into the air. What investigators found inside the homes only deepened the unease. In one house, a set of clothes still hung damp on the line, the scent of soap clinging to fabric. In another, a fire smoldered weakly, reduced to embers, suggesting it had been tended not long before. Tables held meals in progress, beans half-cooked, tortillas hardened in pans, cups filled with water. Letters were left half-written on wooden desks. Quills dropped mid-sentence as though their writers had vanished between one word and the next. The sense of abandonment was sudden, not planned, not organized, not deliberate. It was a pause button pressed on life itself. At first, authorities searched for logical explanations. They feared an epidemic had swept through the village, causing panic and mass flight. Doctors were consulted, but no signs of illness were found. Food was fresh, water was clean, livestock were healthy. If disease had come, it had left no trace behind. Others suggested migration. Perhaps the villagers had left for better opportunities, abandoning their homes for life elsewhere. But if that were true, why had they left so abruptly, leaving meals half-eaten, fires burning, tools in fields? Why had they not taken their clothes, their valuables, their carts, their animals? Whispers of darker explanations crept in. Some believed the people of San Lazaro had been taken in a mass ritual, led by cult leaders into the mountains for a sacrifice. They pointed to the unfinished letters as messages abandoned when a bell tolled and villagers were summoned to some secret gathering. But if there had been such a ritual, where were the signs? No altars were found, no gathering places, no evidence of struggle. Theories spread faster than evidence. In nearby towns, people began to call the valley La Quebrada Hueca, the Hollow Valley. They whispered that San Lázaro was not the first. Old stories resurfaced, tales from generations past of villages that had vanished in the night, leaving only silence behind. Elders muttered warnings. The valley had always been cursed, and every few decades it claimed its due. Fear spread. Farmers avoided the roads near San Lázaro. Shepherds refused to graze their flocks near its borders. Traders who once relied on its goods found new routes. Unwilling to risk entering the valley, the once bustling market stalls that San Lázaro had filled now carried only its absence. An emptiness neighbors felt as keenly as grief. Beyond the mountains, the mystery drew wider attention. Journalists wrote about the ghost village, their articles accompanied by photographs of empty streets and abandoned meals. The images captured a haunting detail: shoes still lined up neatly by doorways. As though their owners planned to return at any moment, the coverage spread quickly, capturing the imagination of readers far away who could not comprehend how 300 people could vanish without leaving a trace. Online, the theories grew wilder. Some insisted it was alien abduction, pointing to similar cases in folklore where entire groups were said to have been taken into the sky. Others claimed San Lázaro had been part of a government experiment gone wrong, that hidden laboratories in the mountains had released something which forced an evacuation. A few pointed to mining records, suggesting a disaster underground had caused a collapse, swallowing the villagers into the earth. But none of these theories explained the details left behind: the half-written letters, the smoldering fires, the laundry flapping in the breeze. The emotional toll on surrounding communities was heavy. Families who had cousins, nieces, or distant relatives in San Lázaro held vigils, gathering with candles in town squares. Priests led prayers for the missing. Though no funerals could be held, mothers cried not only for their lost kin, but for the silence itself. A silence so absolute it felt like mockery. They begged for answers that never came. Weeks passed, then months. Search teams dwindled. Soldiers were recalled, their reports filled with speculation but no proof. The valley fell into shadow. San Lázaro remained untouched, a ghost town frozen in time. Dust gathered on tables where meals had been abandoned. The school's chalkboards still carried half-finished arithmetic problems. Goats bleated for owners who never came. And at night, the wind howled through empty streets, rattling shutters and carrying the illusion of voices long gone. Years turned into decades, and still no answers emerged. Theories hardened into myths, myths into legends. San Lázaro was spoken of with caution, a warning for travelers and children alike. People claimed the Hollow Valley could swallow the living whole. Some said if you listened at night near its borders, you could hear the faint laughter of children carried on the wind, echoing from nowhere. The truth remained locked inside the silence of the village. And so San Lázaro stood, a scar in the mountains, a place where 300 souls had stepped out of their lives and never returned. For years, San Lázaro remained a ghost town, until a satellite passed overhead and saw what no human eye could. For decades, San Lázaro remained frozen in time. Its homes sat untouched, its fields overgrown, its silence unbroken except by wind and rain. Visitors came rarely, and when they did, they left quickly, unsettled by the stillness. No new answers surfaced, and the mystery seemed destined to remain a legend. And then, years later, the sky itself looked down. The breakthrough began not with investigators, but with an environmental survey. A government satellite program tasked with tracking deforestation scanned over the mountain valleys. Its instruments mapped vegetation, soil temperature, and light patterns. The images returned were meant to measure tree loss. Instead, They reignited a mystery long thought unsolvable. At first, analysts scrolling through the images of the Hollow Valley noticed anomalies. Large circular scars in the soil near San Lazaro. They were faint, but distinct, perfectly round patterns etched into fields that had once grown maize and beans. No machinery had been reported in the region, no fires had been logged, yet the markings appeared blackened, as if the earth itself had been burned in deliberate shapes. Confusion spread among the survey team. Deforestation doesn't leave circles. Natural fires don't burn in such symmetrical rings. Something was wrong. They flagged the images for closer inspection, ordering higher resolution captures on the next satellite pass. Weeks later, when the clearer photographs arrived, the mystery deepened. The new shots showed not only the circular scars, but strange shadows across the valley floor. At first, the analysts assumed they were tricks of light, clouds passing at odd angles. But as they layered images taken at different times of day, the shadows shifted, and in one sequence, they appeared to move. Dozens of figures, faint but human-like in shape, clustered in areas where no structures remained. They were not animals. They were too upright, too evenly proportioned. The images were time-stamped, captured years after San Lazaro's people had vanished. The analysts stared in disbelief. Could it be trespassers, cult gatherings, survivors, or something far stranger? Each new frame raised more questions. If the village had been empty for decades, why did the valley appear to hold life? Theories flooded the control room. Some suggested nomadic groups had occupied the area temporarily. Others whispered about mass hallucinations in interpreting the grainy photos. But when image specialists ran simulations, they confirmed the figures were not artifacts of the lens. They were real, three-dimensional shapes caught on camera. Word of the discovery spread quietly at first, then quickly leaked to the public. News outlets published blurred versions of the satellite photos. Fueling frenzy, headlines screamed, "Are San Lazaro's villagers still alive?" And ghostly figures captured in the Hollow Valley. For the families who had waited decades for answers, hope reignited like fire. Could their relatives still be there, hidden all this time? But that hope was fragile, for the images also unsettled. The figures didn't appear in normal positions. Some stood in clusters, unmoving between frames. Others cast shadows at odd angles, as if their forms bent light differently. As speculation spread, analysts went further. They zoomed into the highest resolution photographs available. What they found chilled them. In the fields closest to the old village, patterns emerged, lines too straight, arcs too deliberate. The blackened circles they had first noticed were not random. They connected, forming spirals and intersecting symbols across acres of soil. The designs were too large to notice from the ground. They could only be seen from above. Geometric patterns burned into the earth, spirals and crosses, symbols older than written records. The images suggested planning, intention, but who or what had made them? The villagers of San Lazaro had vanished suddenly, leaving food on tables. They had not organized such massive works in their final hours, and no outsiders had been reported building in the Hollow Valley. Theories erupted again. Some said the villagers had joined in a mass ritual before disappearing. The symbols their final act. Others claimed the designs were markers for something else. Landing zones, signals, warnings. Skeptics dismissed it all. They argued the shapes were exaggerated, patterns the human brain wanted to see in randomness. But even they could not deny the starkness of the circles, black against the green valley floor. Meanwhile, the figures continued to haunt the images. In one frame, they seemed to cluster near the old church. In another, they spread into the fields, casting long shadows across the spirals in the soil. Most disturbing of all, in one sequence taken just minutes apart, a cluster of shapes appeared in a new position, as though they had moved between exposures. The timestamp proved it. Whatever they were active. The satellite program's lead analyst later admitted, "We expected to measure forests. Instead, we saw a village that wasn't empty at all." Governments grew cautious. Officials warned against wild speculation, but their very silence only fueled belief. Online forums lit up. Conspiracy theorists dissected each pixel. Some claimed the images proved alien occupation. Others insisted San Lazaro's villagers had never died but had slipped into a hidden life, shielded from outsiders. Still others argued the figures were something darker, not human at all, but entities that had taken the place of the missing. The Hollow Valley once again became a point of fear. Surrounding towns doubled their avoidance, refusing to send shepherds or traders near its borders. Journalists begged for access to clearer images, but governments withheld them for national security. They said the phrase only poured gasoline on the fire for the families of the vanished. The photographs were agony. They showed something: figures, shadows, symbols, but not the truth. Were their relatives alive? Or had the valley birthed something else in their place? The satellite program, meanwhile, continued its quiet monitoring. More images were captured, more patterns revealed, but the most chilling came on the third pass. Months later, the valley looked the same. Abandoned houses, overgrown fields, spirals in the earth. But this time, the symbols seemed sharper, more defined, as though they had been renewed, reburned into the soil. And at the edge of the valley, new lines appeared, intersecting in strange ways. Analysts stared in silence, because the satellite had not only captured the figures and the burned circles, it had also recorded symbols carved into the earth, too large to see from the ground. When the satellite images of San Lazaro leaked to the public, disbelief turned into demand. What had once been myth now had evidence: spirals etched into soil, shadows like people moving where no one should be, symbols too large to notice from the ground. The world wanted answers, and governments could no longer ignore the valley. Months later, a joint expedition was organized. Soldiers, scientists, and forensic teams moved cautiously into the Hollow Valley, this time armed with GPS units, ground scanners, and orders to document everything. For many of them, it was their first time standing on the soil of San Lazaro. For others, especially older locals, it was a return they had never wished to make. Some muttered prayers as their boots crunched on the overgrown paths, eyes darting toward the shuttered windows of houses that had not known laughter in decades. The first discovery confirmed what satellites had hinted at. Across fields where crops had once grown, the earth bore scars, giant spirals coiled into the soil, each one nearly the size of a house. Lines intersected at precise angles, some stretching for hundreds of feet, forming geometric designs impossible to mistake for random burns. From the ground, they looked like little more than patches of blackened earth. But when drones rose into the air to capture aerial footage, the full scope became visible. Enormous glyphs spanning the valley floor, etched like a message meant only for the sky. Scientists scraped samples from the soil. What they found was strange. The earth within the spirals was scorched down several inches. The layers fused as if exposed to intense heat, and yet, no wildfire had ever been recorded in San Lazaro. The burn patterns were too clean, too contained. Unlike any natural blaze, they radiated from central points outward, the precision of their edges suggesting deliberate creation. But created by whom? And how? The deeper investigators pushed into the valley, the stranger their findings became. In caves miles away from the village, searchers stumbled upon neat piles of belongings: clothing, shoes, tools, all arranged with eerie care. There were no signs of weathering, no scattering by animals. Each pile was deliberate, as if the villagers themselves had placed their possessions down before walking on without them. In one cave, investigators found bundles of letters tied with twine. The ink faded but legible. The letters were never mailed, addressed to distant relatives, describing life in San Lazaro before the vanishings. Some ended mid-sentence. For the forensic teams, this discovery raised new questions. If the villagers had abandoned their homes in haste, why had their belongings been carried so far, only to be left in such orderly stacks? And then came the carvings. On sheer rock faces near the valley's edge, fresh inscriptions were found, dates carved deep into the stone. What froze the investigators was not just their presence, but the numbers themselves. Some dated from years beyond the disappearance, 10 years, 20. Even as recently as 3 years before the expedition arrived, the rock bore marks that should not have existed. Who carved them? And why would anyone inscribe dates that stretched beyond the time when San Lazaro was already empty? These eerie discoveries shattered the fragile theories that had once tried to explain the vanishings. Some officials leaned toward the idea of mass migration, insisting that San Lazaro's people had left the valley by choice, carrying their belongings to caves before moving on. The symbols, they argued, were nothing more than attempts at communication, rituals of farewell etched into soil and stone. But the explanation faltered under scrutiny. Why abandon meals mid-bite? Letters half-written, fires still smoldering? Why carry belongings miles away, only to discard them neatly in caves? Others whispered of military involvement. Had San Lazaro been chosen as a test site? Were the symbols scorched into the earth the result of experimental weapons or classified projects? The fresh carvings of later dates, they suggested, could have been markers left by operatives, not villagers. But again, no records supported such claims, and officials denied them vehemently. For many, the simplest conclusion was also the most disturbing, that San Lazaro's people had not left by choice. The valley's silence, the scorched spirals, the carved dates, the belongings laid down like offerings. All of it suggested an event beyond comprehension. Some said the villagers had been taken, not by armies or governments, but by something that had always lingered in the Hollow Valley. The forensic reports only deepened the unease. Soil analysis confirmed that the spirals had been burned with a heat source beyond anything naturally occurring. Yet no residue of accelerants was found. The belongings in caves showed no signs of decay, as if protected from the elements until recently revealed. And the carvings, examined closely, showed differences in depth and sharpness, suggesting they had been made over decades, not all at once. Even hardened soldiers reported unease. Some said they felt washed while working. Others complained their radios failed in specific spots, replaced by bursts of static that sometimes resembled whispers. Drone operators noted battery drains far faster than expected, machines dropping suddenly from the sky. Theories fractured into two camps. Skeptics insisted San Lazaro's people had staged their disappearance as part of a cult-like migration, leaving behind signs of ritual in soil and stone. Believers argued it was something else entirely, an encounter with forces unseen, forces that left their mark on the valley and carried 300 people into absence. What remained undeniable was the unease, the sense that the valley was not empty at all, as the ground teams packed their findings. One investigator recorded in her journal, "The village is silent, but the valley is not dead. It feels inhabited by something we cannot see." And so San Lazaro's mystery shifted from absence to presence. The question was no longer why the villagers had gone, but what they had encountered. Had San Lazaro's people left by choice? Or had they been taken by something that still lingered in the valley? Decades have passed since San Lazaro's people vanished, but the mystery refuses to fade. Instead, it has grown. From a local tragedy into a story whispered across borders, retold in books, documentaries, and countless late-night conversations. Yet for those who live near the Hollow Valley, the wound is not folklore. It is present. It lingers like a shadow that will not lift. The community remains split, torn between skeptics and believers. On one side stand those who insist that San Lazaro's disappearance must have a rational explanation. They cling to theories of migration, cult behavior, or hidden disasters. People don't just vanish. They argue. They leave signs, choices, reasons. To them, the scorched spirals in the earth were elaborate rituals or signals. The belongings found in caves were abandoned during a trek, and the carved dates were hoaxes. left by pranksters who wanted to keep the legend alive. On the other side are the believers. They point to the very same evidence: the deliberate spirals, the untouched belongings, the carvings that stretched into years when no villager should have been alive. And ask, if it was all human, why was it never repeated anywhere else? Why only here? For them, the Hollow Valley is not simply a stage for human error or superstition. It is a place where the ordinary world thins, and something else breaks through. The divide is sharp. Families who once shared meals and markets now argue over what truly happened. In some homes, the subject is forbidden entirely. In others, it dominates every conversation, especially when anniversaries of the vanishing draw near. The debate has shaped the identity of entire towns, binding them forever to a silence they did not choose. Meanwhile, San Lazaro itself has been renamed by those who fear it. To locals, it is no longer San Lazaro, no longer just a village that once thrived in the mountains. It is now called the Valley of Echoes. The name carries more than poetry. Travelers who dare to step near its borders speak of hearing voices on the wind, not the rustle of leaves, not the howl of air through stone, but words, sometimes their own names whispered faintly, sometimes fragments of sentences. Like the echo of conversations cut short long ago, campers have reported compasses failing, spinning wildly as if magnetized by something deep beneath the earth. Hikers say their lanterns sputter and die without cause, as though the valley rejects their light. Others claim to have seen orbs of brightness hovering in the night sky, drifting silently over the abandoned village before vanishing. Few remain long enough to investigate. The stories have spread so widely that most avoid the valley altogether. Maps mark it with warnings. Local guides refuse to lead tours near it. The once fertile fields lie wild and overgrown, the houses reduced to shells, their wooden beams creaking in the wind. The silence of San Lazaro has become its own barrier, keeping people away without need for walls. And yet, for some, the silence draws them in. Every year, on the anniversary of the disappearance, relatives of the missing return to the valley's edge. They do not enter, but they come as close as they dare. They bring flowers, photographs, and offerings, placing them on stones at the border where San Lazaro begins. Some cry, others simply stand in silence, their faces turned toward the abandoned streets, as though waiting for loved ones to step out and wave for them. Grief is not dulled by time. It is sharpened by the absence of answers. The legend of San Lazaro has become global, but to its families, it remains personal. Children grew up without parents. Brothers and sisters grew old without their kin. For each candle lit at the valley's edge, there is a name whispered into the night, and still, the valley gives no reply, or so it seemed, not long ago. A new satellite sweep passed over the region, part of routine monitoring of climate shifts. At first, the images appeared ordinary: fields, overgrowth, the decayed remains of houses barely standing. But then, analysts noticed something that froze them in their tracks: fresh markings. In the very fields where spirals had once been burned into the earth, new patterns had appeared, sharper this time, cleaner, lines stretching hundreds of feet, forming shapes no erosion could explain. The soil glowed darker in contrast with its surroundings, as though scorched anew. When analysts aligned the images, the patterns resolved into letters. One word: return. The revelation spread like fire. To some, it was proof that the villagers had been taken, not destroyed, and that the valley was calling them, or someone else, back. To others, it was a hoax, a manipulation of images designed to fuel superstition. Yet experts confirmed the data. The markings were real. Something, or someone, had etched them into the land. Theories spun out once more. Was it a message left by survivors, hidden all this time? Was it a warning? An invitation? Or something else, entirely beyond human comprehension? The families of the missing wept when they saw the images. For them, it was another wound layered upon old scars, hope sharpened into pain. If their loved ones had indeed returned, why only in this form? Why only in letters too vast to be seen except from above? The Valley of Echoes remains silent, but the word burned into its fields has shifted the silence into menace. The unanswered question is no longer simply, where did they go? But will they come back? And what will return with them? And so San Lazaro endures, a story without an ending, a scar without healing. It stands as a reminder that some places resist explanation, that the earth holds mysteries that satellites can only glimpse but never solve, because some places do not just disappear, they wait to be seen again and again.